my story starts with a cliche. Like lots of other authors, I was read to lots as a child by my dad, and I used to write lots of stories when I was at school, to the point where I would spend my break times writing in this precious notebook I carried around. And I remember a boy coming up to me once and saying, like, "Why do you spend so much of your time writing in this book?" And I said to him, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, "Because I'm going to be a writer when I grow up." But before we think my path to becoming an author was written in the stars, I did also want to be a farmer, a bird watcher, a pop star, a professional roller skater, briefly a vicar, and most bizarrely of all, a nurse. Bizarre because I've had a lifelong phobia of people being sick, so it's not a very compatible profession. Writing was something I felt I could do. I mean, maths, I struggled so much throughout school with maths and science and all those kind of subjects, but anything that involved writing felt like a natural fit. But I actually very quickly forgot my love of writing stories. And when I was about 12, I had this poetry book for children, and I decided to put the poems to music because I also loved music. And that was the start of my songwriting. And for probably the next 15 years, I just wrote songs. I didn't write anything else. So I suppose poems. And looking back now, those songs were not kind of abstract odes to love or anything like that. They were all stories. Most of those songs were about people I had met or experiences, and they, from the first verse to the last, told a story. So I think that love of storytelling was kind of quite innate. Even during that period, I wasn't really writing. In my 20s, I was a young mum. I had my first son at 25. I was a full-time teacher. I'd studied music at university and then left not having a clue what I wanted to do, so went into teaching. So I was teaching full-time. I had a young family. There was not much time for anything other than surviving and working. But I did join in my late 20s a folk band, and the songwriting just grew, and I was churning out songs. That was what I did to relax, I suppose. Fast forward to 2018, and I'd completely pushed any thoughts of writing a novel or anything like that out of my mind. But then one random day, I stumbled upon this story of Cornish miners travelling over to India. I was in a different band by this point, and together we decided to pursue this story. And initially we thought it would be about the music. We would combine Cornish and Indian music. I had not anticipated the amount of stories and writing that would be involved. We travelled all around Cornwall collecting stories from people who had experience of the mines out in India. I travelled to India and collected stories from the people over there, and then wrote about them in blog posts and in information for the CD booklet. And this love of writing just, I suppose, blossomed through that project. That project is probably one of the most special experiences of my life. I'll put the link down below if you want to look it up. It was called Cola's Gold, and with the Rowan Tree band, the Rowan Tree. So yeah, that ignited this little spark, which I didn't even necessarily realise at the time. Then just before Christmas in 2019, my dad had a very serious health scare, and it brought up all this stuff in my mind about childhood, about teenagers living on an island, and we ended up having to spend Christmas just with our immediate family in Cornwall. So I had all this time, and I just started writing, getting all these feelings out. Thankfully my dad was fine, but all this stuff it had brought up, I just poured out onto my laptop. And by the end of the Christmas holiday, I'd written 40,000 words, none of it publishable. It was about my experience being a teenager living on an island, and perhaps one day after I'm long gone, someone might find it and publish it, but it won't see the light of day until then. But that experience blew my mind. I thought, oh my gosh, like I've just ended up with all this writing, and I loved doing it. And I loved the island setting, but I knew I couldn't publish any or share in any way what I had produced. So I began looking into the island's history, and that love of story, that love of historical story that I'd gained through the Colas Gold project, I felt that same spark of excitement, that same buzz. And suddenly Clara popped into my mind, and then Jimmy, and then I had these two characters, and I began the process of writing my first novel, Silver Darlings. That first novel was a massive learning curve, not just in writing a book, but the mind-bending world of publishing, and I learned so much. But through doing it, I felt I was ready to tell the story I'd always wanted to tell, which was about Queenie Reid, my great-grandmother. And Queenie had actually started as a song years earlier. I had written a song about Queenie, but I'd never been able to get it right. It had never been used in any of the bands I'd been in. I tried it in so many different ways and it just never quite clicked. Whereas as a book, I think her story was just too big for a song. It needed a full book. So there it is in a quite long-winded nutshell, how I went from Laura twiddling around with a few little songs and decades back scribbling in a notebook to today, when I have, I think, 12 or 13 novels published, and lots more to come. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It would be great if you'd like to subscribe, and there'll be plenty more videos coming.